Okay. So in behalf of the Board of Trustees, may I welcome everybody, ladies and gentlemen, another good afternoon, and also to our APU members, colleagues, and friends. So welcome to another APU forum. My name is Mafi Tai, and I will be your moderator for today's forum with the theme U.S.-China Possible Conflict over Taiwan. So what does imminent crisis mean for the Philippines? So this is another interesting topic that we will be discussing, and we are fortunate that we have invited another veteran journalist who would be sharing this with us. So if you have questions during the forum or questions about the topic related to this, you may type in your questions on the chat box, and then I will try to accommodate them as much as possible during the forum. So everybody is muted except for the speaker and the moderator. And okay, and I'd like to inform you that we are also live in social media accounts of APU, or the Association for Philippines, China and Understanding. So before we start, let us put ourselves in the presence of the Lord. Right. Heavenly Father, creator of heaven and earth, thank you for another opportunity to gather us today. As we have this forum, we pray for your guidance as your good citizens to the nations and to respective leaders in ways of justice and peace. Protect us from the exploitation, conflict, and war. Lead us to find peace, freedom, and respect. Unite us in the making and sharing of being an instruments of peace against oppression, poverty, and disease. Lead us that we may grow in harmony and friendship. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so for the opening remarks, we will just go back later on when our chairman arrives. So without further ado, so may we proceed to introduction of our speaker to be introduced by the Vice President of Association for Philippines China Understanding, APCU. He's none other than VP Felix Guanzon. VP Felix, please.
Good afternoon. Our speaker, Mr. KANG Lim, was born in Manila in January 1959. Worked as a journalist for almost 4 decades, 24 years in Beijing, and 5 years in Taipei. Currently, the Beijing-based global affairs correspondent of Singapore English language, the Straits Times. Previously, with Reuters for 27 years, once serving as Taipei Bureau Chief and subsequently Beijing Bureau Chief before retiring in 2018. Won 13 international journalism awards, including Overseas Press Club of America, Society of American Business Editors and Writers, Osborne Elliott Prize, Society of Publishers in Asia, and Reuters 2011 Reporter of the Year. Ben broke some of the biggest stories out of China and Taiwan, including Paramount leader Deng Xiaoping's imminent death in 1997, President Xi Jinping's rise in 2007, and North Korea's first nuclear test in 2006. This is a testament to his extensive network of sources in China, his resourcefulness, and journalistic acumen. Interviewed numerous Asian leaders, including Philippine President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo and Benigno Aquino III, Chinese President Hu Jintao and Premier Wen Xiaobao, Taiwan President Xin Bian, Ma Ching-yu, and Tsai Ing-wen. Wrote and published a book in Chinese in Taiwan in January 2016, constantly predicting that President Xi Jinping will serve at least 3 5-year terms. Ben was vindicated in 2018 when China's parliament amended its constitution and scrapped the two-term limit on the presidency. The book was one of China's top 10 bestseller in the social science category that year. Working on second book, which will be in English. A consultant to numerous ambassadors and diplomatic in Beijing and a regular speaker at foreign embassy in Beijing, international forums and foreign chamber of commerce, as well as a guest lecturer at universities in Asia and Europe. Ladies and gentlemen, our speaker, Mr. Bin Kang Lim.
Thank you, Vice President Guanzon, for the kind introduction. And thank you to Chairman Lambino for inviting me, right, to give this talk. My talk will be divided into three portions. The first part will be about why there could be conflict between the US and China. The second part will be what it means for us, the Philippines. And the third is PBBM, in my humble opinion, can play the role of regional peacemaker. So part one, the Chinese word tong, yi, right, is translated differently in Taiwan and China. In Taiwan, it is translated unification, but in China, it is translated reunification. Because for Taiwan, the two sides were never one, i.e., the PRC never ruled Taiwan for a single day. But for China, for Beijing, it is reunification because Chiang Kai-shek fled from mainland China to Taiwan in 1949 and took with him most of China's gold reserves, as well as thousands of relics currently displayed at Taipei's National Palace Museum. So China and Taiwan are different from North and South Korea, which signed an armistice in 1953. China and Taiwan never signed anything. So as far as China is concerned, the civil war is not over. Hindi pa yan tapos, right? Taiwan's ruling party claims that Taiwan is a sovereign state, but then Taiwan still styles itself as the Republic of China. And so if Taiwan declares de jure independence, China is mandated by the anti-secession law passed by China's parliament in 2005 to invade Taiwan. So, and how can China claim that it has achieved the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation if the country is still split, right? For China, Taiwan is, a problem carried over from history, right? Because of the so-called century of humiliation. The First and Second Opium Wars against Britain, in which China ceded Hong Kong and eventually Kowloon to Britain, right? That was the first. The second part was the 1894 to 95 First Sino-Japanese War, in which China ceded Taiwan to Japan. And the third was, of course, the 1900 Boxer Rebellion, in which 8 countries invaded China. The fourth was the Japanese invasion and occupation of Northeast China in 1931, starting in 1931, followed by an 8-year war that ended only in 1945, right? So for China, reunification with Taiwan is it is sacred, right? And for Xi Jinping, this will be his most enduring legacy, right? But what's the big deal with one China, right? The Republic of China, or as Taiwan is known officially, or ROC, had the upper hand when it was a member of the UN from 1945 to 1971, right? The PRC joined in 1971, ousted the ROC from the UN, and has since gained the upper hand, right? Now, if I can use a chess game as an analogy, right? So the two sides were playing a chess game called One China, right? And so from 1945 to 71, Taiwan or the ROC had the upper hand. But now, since 71, China has the upper hand. And so Taiwan no longer wants to play this chess game, right? It wants to play a new game called One China, One Taiwan, which would be tantamount to independence, or they want to play a chess game called Two Chinas, i.e. PRC and ROC. But China-Taiwan issue is not like North and South Korea, because the two are both members of the UN and are both about equal, right? Of course, South Korea is bigger with a population of about 60 to 70 million. North Korea has a population of about 23 to 24 million. It's also, China and Taiwan are also unlike East and West Germany, because Taiwan is only, the ROC or the Taiwan authorities are left with only one province, and that is Taiwan province. Whereas China has, whereas the Communist Party, they have control over most of China. So for China, Taiwan is to China what Sulu is to the Philippines, right? Now, we have to ask ourselves the question whether we will agree to Sulu becoming independent, right? And if not, then who are we to say that, that Taiwan can become independent, or that we will interfere in China's domestic affairs, right? So the relations between China and Taiwan are not bilateral relations. It's a triangular love-hate affair involving China, Taiwan, and the US, right? But the assumptions are a recipe for disaster, right? The US and Taiwan assume that China will not invade Taiwan because China is too dependent on imported oil, grain, and chips, right? But China, on the other hand, assumes that the US will not rush to Taiwan's rescue in the event of conflict, and that the US will only sell weapons and fight to the last Taiwanese, right? So this is very dangerous. But then manageable tensions are not necessarily bad for all the stakeholders. Like it or not, the intended and unintended consequences of the simmering tensions and the US and Taiwan trying to change the political status quo are the following. So the US gets to sell more weapons to Taiwan, right? The US is able to demonize China, right? And portray China as the evil empire, the big bad wolf, right? Taiwan, on the other hand, gets to break out of diplomatic isolation, right? For China, it galvanizes the Chinese nation. Nobody in China will tell you that they are for independence, because like I said earlier, reunification for China and for Chinese is sacred, right? And if war breaks out, there will be no winners, only losers, right? So what does it mean for us, the Philippines? Now, of course, we have the Mutual Defense Treaty with the US. We also have the VFA. We also have EDCA. And so US troops now have access to 5 bases in the Philippines, even though the US left Clark and Subic back in 1991, right? And so because of the because of the geography, the proximity of the Philippines to Taiwan, if war breaks out between China and Taiwan and the US intervenes, then it'll be too close for comfort for us, right? And Malaysia's former Prime Minister Mahathir accused the US in public of provoking war in Taiwan. And so if you use a needle to prick the dragon repeatedly, time and again, sooner or later, the dragon will feel the pain, right? And so Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan in August, right? And with the aim of trying to prevent China from invading Taiwan, right? That is the US aim, to preserve freedom and democracy in Taiwan. That is their stated claim. But for China, like Mahathir said, this is outright provocation, right? So we have to ask ourselves the question, do we want to be caught in the line of fire, right, if conflict were to break out between China and the US over Taiwan. We could become collateral damage, right? And who am I to say, I'm not saying that we should, I have no opinion regarding the MDT, VFA, and EDCA, what we should do with it, because this is, I think, PBBM's decision, right? And I think PBBM, in my humble opinion, has the political wisdom, right? And he's respected by both China and the US. And so he has the potential to become a regional peacemaker, right? Ms. Tai, can you share with the group the first photo, right? Is it up on the screen? Because I can't see the picture from my end.
Working
Makfi?
on it, sir.
Yes, Raven.
Right. So is it up? Right. In this photo, we see former First Lady Imelda Romualdez Marcos visiting China back in 1974 with Mao Zedong and a 17-year-old PBBM, right? Now, the trip led, of course, a lot of people know this, that it led to the 1975 normalization of relations in 1975. But for me, the trip, right? Another significant outcome of the trip was Imelda and PBBM impressed Mao and China so much that Mao decided to stop exporting the revolution. Meaning, China back then was funding and arming the Communist Party of the Philippines as well as the NPA. But that stopped after Imelda visited and after we normalized relations with China. The second picture, please. Right. So in this second picture, you will see again Imelda with Premier Zhou Enlai, who is third from right, as well as PBBM in Barong Tagalog and Imelda in a Turno. So even back then in 1974, the first family already made the Turno and the Barong Tagalog, they made this fashion statement on the world stage, right? Pangatlong picture, please. Third picture. Right. So here is a picture of Madame Mao, the wife of Mao Zedong, with Imelda, and she is, she broke into laughter. I don't know what joke they were sharing, but like I said, Imelda Marcos wowed China, and so back then she was invited to China by Premier Zhou Enlai, but Mao Zedong was not in Beijing, so she could not meet Mao, and so Madame Mao intervened, changed her itinerary, hence she and PBBM were able to meet Marcos in Hunan province, right? Next picture, please. Right here again, we see Madame Mao with Imelda and PBBM, right? Now, in those days, right? Oh, the last picture, please. The last picture. Right here, you do not see the faces, right? But this is Madame Mao hugging PBBM with Imelda looking on. Now, just a bit of background to put things in context. In those days, China was impoverished and backward. And Chinese women were banned from putting on makeup. They were banned from wearing high heels, shoes. And it was also banned to perm your hair, right? So let alone hugging. Bawal yan, right? Hindi yan politically correct. But you see Madame Mao hugging PBBM because she was so impressed, right, with the 17-year-old PBBM. She hugged him, and even gave him a bicycle, right? Now, bicycles in those days were not a necessity kasi sobrang pulubi ang China. It was considered a luxury item, right? So if Imelda Marcos was the ultimate diplomat, right, who wowed China, PBBM at the age of 17 was the debonair diplomat, right? And so I think today, as we speak, PBBM, he's been in office less than, a little over, I think 100 days, right? Or maybe not even 100, I'm not sure. But I think he has the potential, right, to play the role of regional peacemaker and prevent conflict between China and Taiwan and prevent the US and Japan from getting involved, right? And of course, the first two countries he visited after he took office were Indonesia and Singapore. But then when he went to the UN and then in New York, I think we saw PBBM, his potential, his political wisdom. And I think with the respect of both the US and China, he will be able to play the role of regional peacemaker, right? And with that, I'd like to open the floor to questions. Hello, I can't hear you. Over to you, Ms. Tai.
Thank you, Ben, for that very substantial presentation, and that was very enlightening. So may I introduce our, before I proceed to the next program, may I call on our APCU chairman, Chairman Raul Lambino. He's now admitted in Zoom. Mr. Chairman.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Oh, yes, Mr. Chairman. Loud and clear. Good afternoon.
Hi, Chairman Lambino.
Hi,
Chairman.
Yes.
Hi, Ben. I'm sorry that I am not able to connect immediately because I was traveling along the North Luzon Expressway on my way to Manila. So I had a very poor connection. So I have to stop in Clark just to get a connection so that I can join the Zoom meeting. So good afternoon, everyone.
Yes.
And we are very happy that we have with us one of the most acknowledged expert with regards to Philippines-China relations or with regards to issues pertaining to Asia-Pacific affairs, more particularly regarding the relationship between the big economic and military powers in the region. More particularly, I'm referring to the United States of America, the People's Republic of China, Japan, and of course the other economies as well, like South Korea. But for today's discussion, we are going to focus on what could happen to the Philippines if and when the conflict in South China Sea will escalate and then eventually will lead to the possible problem about the Taiwan issue, which until now is one of the considered flashpoint of conflict between the two superpowers, the United States and that of China. Now, we hope that this is not going to happen. And if and when this eventuality will come to pass, the question that comes to mind is, what will the Philippines do? Does the Philippines have contingency plan? Does it have any plan already to take a look at the welfare of the more than 100,000 Filipinos working now in Taipei or in Taiwan, on other cities? So this is a matter that is really important for the Philippines. It's important for all Filipinos. We know that China is now the biggest partner of the Philippines in terms of trade and in terms of investment even. It has now become one of the main sources of official development assistance. with the warming relationship between the Philippines and China coming into force during the time of President Duterte. And we are hopeful that the relationship between the Philippines and China will even become warmer with the administration of President Bongbong Marcos and the eventual the National People's Congress meeting that's going to happen in the next few days in China, and this is going to help strengthen the relationship between the Philippines and China. But anyway, we are going to listen to the acknowledged expert in this issue here in the region, and we're very proud. We're very happy that Mr. Benjamin Kang Lim here, he has agreed to talk about the issues pertaining to the conflict that may arise between the People's Republic of China and the United States in regard to the issue about Taiwan. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome him. He's going to be properly introduced later, and then we are surely going to get a lot of insights and a lot of knowledge about what could be the outcome of this conflict if and when it is going to happen. Thank you and good afternoon.
Thank you, Chairman Lambino, and thank you for inviting me, giving me this opportunity to speak to APCU. Regarding your question, of course, anti-Chinese or anti-China hawks will not agree, right? But I think China has been relatively restrained, right? And I use the word relatively because if you compare China with Russia, or if you compare China with North Korea or even other countries, I think even after Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan, China, of course, conducted military exercises, but that is because China cannot not react, right? Ahead of the 20th Party Congress, which will convene on October 16, China cannot afford to be perceived to be politically weak. And it's not just China. China and Xi Jinping cannot afford to be seen as weak. And so China had to react to Nancy Pelosi's visit. Of course, there was a naval blockade, or what was tantamount to a naval blockade. They fired live drills. But the reason I use the word relative restraint is because no one was killed. There were no casualties. There were no damages, right? China just sort of, it was a warm up for China ahead of any, conflict, right? So China is not trigger happy, right? And they are not, looking for a fight. If you look at the way China has dealt with the U.S., right? It's tit for tat, but it's measured tit for tat. It's not, taking off the gloves and free for all. No, China seeks friendly relations, good relations with the U.S., with us, its neighbors, with Japan, South Korea, even EU, right? But of course, there are a lot of misperceptions and misapprehensions between China and the rest of the world. We don't understand China enough, and China doesn't understand us enough, right? Hence, sometimes the two sides, right? When I say the two sides, I mean either China-US, China-ASEAN, China-Japan, China-EU. They sometimes talk past each other, right? And there is no trust, right? It's not just lack of trust, it's, total lack of trust. Because in the past, when the US says that they are not out to contain China, right? There was plausible deniability, right? The US could always back then in the old days point to things that they were doing that would be evidence, right? Evidence that it was not trying to topple the communist regime in China. But today, there is no room for plausible deniability, right? And vice versa, it applies. when China says it is not trying to supplant the US, right? The US is also unconvinced. Hindi rin naniniwala yan. So the lack of trust between the two sides, right, between the world's two biggest economies, is really dangerous, and it could be a recipe for disaster because, like I said earlier, we could be caught in the line of fire. We could become collateral damage, right? If you look at earlier, I was saying that China was relatively restrained, right? Of course, China, militarized the West Philippine Sea, or part of the South China Sea, but that was action, or that was in reaction to what happened during the administration, the Aquino administration, i.e., we lost Scarborough, and then we took them to the arbitration in The Hague, and then we had EDCA. We signed the EDCA with the U.S. So it's cause and effect, right? Because of what they did, we reacted, and because of what we did, they reacted, and so the tensions have been mounting, right? But maybe it's time for everybody to, for cooler heads to prevail, for everybody to sit down and think about it, because war, like I said earlier, is not in anyone's interest, right? I don't think China will go to war against us over the West Philippine Sea, right? China seeks peaceful reunification with Taiwan. They say that all the time, but they are not ruling out the use of force because Taiwan could declare de jure independence. And again, on the West Philippine Sea, they are seeking joint exploration, right? They want trade. They want to trade with us. They want to invest in the Philippines. And so China is benefited from globalization. So I don't think China wants to end globalization, right? It's not China which wants to decouple, right? But of course, the U.S. The U.S. also fears China because it doesn't understand China, right? We fear what we do not understand, right? And same thing between the U.S. and China, right? Natatakot yan kasi hindi nila naiintindihan yung kabila, right? And so I think, as an ally of the U.S., we as a neighbor of China, I think maybe we can, play the mediator, right? And I think Imelda Marcos did a great job back in the 70s, right? When she visited China. But we have that unique role because of our geopolitical position, right? Our geography, and it is a blessing and a curse, right? At the same time, it is cursed because we're too close to Taiwan, but it is a blessing because we are, we are geopolitically, important to both China and the U.S., right? And so, with that, I'll turn it back to Chairman Lambino and Ms. Tai.
All right. Thank you for that, Ben. So Ben has tried to answer what the questions thrown by our Chairman Lambino in his opening remarks. Mr. Chair, I just want to inform that Ben earlier has made his discussion about this U.S.-China conflict, and then he added up by answering your questions earlier. So is it okay if we proceed with the questions and answer? So hearing none, so let's proceed. So Ben, earlier you highlighted that the China is like being provoked. It's like being provoked, like, and you mentioned there's this dragon. If you put a needle and pinch the dragon, and then that's the dragon was to China, and it's being provoked, no? And there will be, invasion. China will invade the Taiwan. So what will be the possible solution for the Philippine government to contain our OFWs in Taiwan if in the event that this war eventually happens? This is also synonymous to what our APCU chairman raised earlier.
Right. Now, I can't remember if I used the word provocation, but it's perceived provocation. Right?
Oh, all right.
It's perceived to be provocation by the Chinese, right?
Okay.
Of course, the US will never admit that they're trying or deliberately trying to provoke China, right? But it's a question of perception. And both sides, China and the US, perceive it differently. But I think I don't, because the last time when Nancy Pelosi, after Nancy Pelosi visited and after China conducted military exercises, the Taiwanese went berserk when we were talking about evacuation plans, because they thought that it was going to be bad for their business, that foreign investors will no longer invest in Taiwan. And so they panicked, and they even criticized us, right, for even talking about evacuation. But I think it is only responsible, right, to draft or to update our evacuation plans, right? Because in the event that conflict breaks out. But of course, there's no timetable for reunification. We don't know when it's going to happen. And China will never, or China is unlikely, not never, China is unlikely to say they will declare a timetable and say that they are going to invade by X date. So if anything, it'll be a surprise attack, and it could be all over in 2-3 days, right? I don't think Taiwan is Ukraine. I don't think Taiwan will be able to put up a fight. The Taiwanese may disagree, and they may criticize me for saying this, but Taiwan has had it very easy, right? They led a very comfortable life. They're complacent, but of course, the US and maybe even the EU may sell weapons to Taiwan, and like some people jokingly say, the US will fight China to the last Taiwanese, but not to the last American soldier, because I don't think the US or China thinks that the US is unlikely to risk the lives of American soldiers and go to war against China over Taiwan, right? But I think aside from updating our evacuation plans, I think we can talk to both sides, or maybe all sides, all sides, meaning we can talk to both the US and Taiwan, right? And if we are not in a position to do it unilaterally, maybe we can do it as a bloc. Maybe ASEAN can talk to, the US and China. And if not just ASEAN, then maybe it's ASEAN plus Japan and South Korea, right? Because we do not want war, right? But there are hawks, right, in some countries who welcome war, right? Especially the arms manufacturers, right? And the people who are convinced that, engaging with China, decades of engagement with China did not turn China into a liberal democracy. And so they are frustrated. They're not just disappointed, they're frustrated, and they want to change the regime in China. Now that will be, I think, dangerous, not just for us, but for the entire region, and maybe even for the rest of the world, right? Trying to topple regimes, right? Of course, nobody will ever admit that they are trying to do so. But if you look at what they say and what they do, right? China, from China's perspective, from the Chinese prism, like I said earlier, it is difficult to convince China that the US is not out to topple the Communist Party.
All right. Thank you for that. So we have another question from President Jeffrey Nang. The United States just banned all American citizens and corporations from working with China's high-tech semiconductor companies. Do you see any off-ramp or de-escalation in the future instead of this vicious cycle of tit for that?
Right. I may be wrong, right? But gazing into the crystal ball, I think while Biden is in power, I don't think U.S. policy towards China will change, and it will only worsen, right? Because for the U.S., China is a threat, and they think that China needs to be put in their place, right? And there is a consensus between both Republicans and Democrats, right? In the U.S., there used to be, at least in the Congress, there used to be a pro-business, right, group. There used to be a pro-human rights group, which would be anti-China, and there used to be a pro-national security group, right? And of course, in the past, the pro-business group had the final say, or had more sway, and so they were able to convince the administration that they needed to do business with China, and this was good for everybody, right? It's not one-way traffic. It's good. It's good for all sides, for the U.S., for China, for us, for the rest of the world. But then now there is a consensus, a growing consensus in the U.S. that the U.S. can no longer tolerate or accommodate China, because if the U.S. does not do anything, right, then China will eventually supplant the U.S., right, displace the U.S., become number one, and some hawks in the U.S. think that China will be the evil empire. They've accused China of being the Nazis, which I do not agree with, right? Because it becomes very emotional. It becomes an impassioned issue, right? And so being anti-China is politically correct, right? People who are not even pro-China, people who try to call a spade and try to be fair and balanced, could end up being crucified, because again, the perception is that, you know, people who are maybe in the treading the middle path are too close to China. So that is the problem.
So I have a question, Ben. So what is the best way to avoid this conflict?
Dialogue, sit down and talk, right? It's and right now the US and China are not talking, because after Nancy Pelosi visited, China suspended I think military talks and on other fronts, right? I can't remember the exact sectors, not sectors, but the exact I can't remember the details, but the two sides are not talking, right? The U.S. used to say that they're willing to talk about climate change, and they're willing to talk about issues that are of interest to the U.S. But from China's point of view, it should be comprehensive across the board. And why should China engage the U.S. in issues that are of interest only to the U.S., right? So for China, they want a comprehensive, broad-based talks, right? So that is the lack of an understanding and between the U.S. and China, because you see, the U.S. has a lot of China experts. China has a lot of experts in the U.S., and they all think that they understand the other side, right? But in my humble opinion, if they really understood the other side, then we will not be where we are at today, right? Now, the people in the US, the China experts in the US, the sinologists, the China watchers, they're the best and brightest. Matalino yan, matanik yan. Pero, do they really understand, right? Because understanding does not necessarily mean agreeing, right? We, for example, we may not necessarily agree with China's policies, with China's positions, but at the very least, we should try to understand where the Chinese are coming from. Bakit ganyan yan? Why is it that they are thinking that way, right? And if we cannot, put ourselves in their shoes and try to understand where they're coming from, then there's no hope for dialogue, because they will be talking past each other, and there will be even more misunderstandings. Back to you.
Thank you. A last question from Mr. Jaime Flor Cruz. For years, China was positively offering olive branch to Taiwan. 3 exchanges. Santong even had breakthrough consensus agreements with then KMT administration. China then seemed okay with status quo and bide time for gradual engagement. So what changed to prompt China's changed posture? It's no longer dealing with KMT, a section of Taiwan population is veering away from mainland, and US position on Taiwan issue has moved away from strategic ambiguity. Do you agree?
Yes, and thank you for all the questions. Forgot to thank everybody, Chairman Lambino, President Jeffrey Ng, as well as Mafi and Jimmy, right? An old friend, right? Yes, the problem with the China-Taiwan issue is China wants the Taiwan ruling party to accept the 1992 consensus. And the 1992 consensus was to simplify things, right? To make it simple to understand, is the 1992 consensus was all about one China, and not two Chinas, and not one China, one Taiwan. But the DPP, the ruling party in Taiwan, argues that Taiwan is already a sovereign nation, or has been since 1949, and they do not want to kowtow to the one China principle, right? From the DPP, from Taiwan's ruling, from the prism of Taiwan's ruling party, the dialogue should start with no preconditions, right? But then from China's point of view, if you will not admit that there's only one China, then what is there to talk about, right? And China is not going to, China will never talk to Taiwan about independence, right? And so what is there to talk about? If you're going to talk about trade, investment, but these things are just the minor things. The major thing would be reunification. But as I said earlier, for Taiwan, it's not reunification, it's unification, being forced to unify. And so if Taiwan is not willing, the end game of any dialogue between China and Taiwan will be reunification, right? But Taiwan doesn't want to talk about reunification, right? Hence, President Biden has been, he's said it, I think, already 4 times. He has deviated from strategic ambiguity with the intent of trying to prevent China from invading Taiwan, with the intent of helping to preserve freedom and democracy in Taiwan. But then it is perceived in China to be provocation, right? Hence, we have all 3 sides, all the stakeholders talking past each other. They don't understand. Maybe it's not they don't understand, maybe it's they're not willing to understand, and they do not want to understand the other side. Hence, we are where we are today, where we have, mounting tensions, and it looks like there is, I hate to say this, but it doesn't appear that there's light at the end of the tunnel, right? Things are just going to get worse in the next 2 years. And in 2024, Taiwan will hold presidential elections. And if Taiwan elects a radical, right? Because the incumbent president, Tsai Ing-wen, who I've interviewed and who I've known since the year, I've known her since '98, but we became friends in 2000. For me, she is a moderate. She's not a radical, right? But if Taiwan elects a radical in 2024, right, then it'll be bad news for everybody, because they may be emboldened by US backing, right? And will push the envelope on independence, which would mean war, right, in our part of the world, right? I don't know if that answers your question.
Thank you very much, Ben. That was very enlightening, and we're very thankful that you were sharing your expertise to us. And unfortunately, we already reached our time limit, so we need to move on the next program. All right, so we will be having an announcement for the next forum, and it will be on November 17, 3 p.m. and it will be discussed by our APPCU 2022 laureate awardees, namely Mr. Rodrigo Capunan and Professor Celso Cainlet. And it will be about the South China Sea behind the scene. So hope to see you next month. And please don't forget to mark your calendars. And for the closing remarks, may I please call on our treasurer, the APCU's treasurer, General Fernando Pase. General Ding, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, my fellow director, Mafi Kai. And I proceed to close. First, I would like to convey our heartfelt gratitude to our distinguished speaker, Mr. Benjamin Kang Lim, for discussing with us a very relevant and timely topic, US-China military conflict over Taiwan and how it means to the Philippines. And for giving us his time, wealth of knowledge, and vast experience culled from the 4 decades of journalists in Beijing and Taipei. His resume informed us of how deep and extensive are his knowledge of this subject based on the articles and books he had written about over the years. This afternoon, he shared with us a glimpse of the possible scenarios that might occur in the hotly contested issue about Taiwan and how it would affect our country. He impressed upon us that working towards one China is not very easy to achieve. Even the terms of unification, reunification, or unification is not agreed by both countries involved. He also informed us about the conflicts in the past involving China and other countries, which started with the Opium War, the war with Japan, the invasion of the 8 countries, and the revolution that occurred in China. And the last one places the situation that is ongoing now in Taiwan. Of course, there are countries involved in this, and recently, of course, the Philippines becomes a party because of our alliances with both the United States and China, especially under the presidency of President Bongbong Marcos. China and Taiwan had accordingly a love-hate relationship, and any provocation in connection with the issue at hand would be possible plus point of conflict in the new era. We all pray, however, that God intercede and ensure that peace ensue among the leaders of the countries involved. And likewise, we all enjoy the peace in all our environment as a result of their agreement. Again, our heartfelt gratitude to you, sir, for sharing your thoughts on the issue at hand. For sure, this will be a big help to all our viewers in this forum, especially on how they will perceive the obtaining situation from here on. Our forum is about to close, but in behalf of our APCO chairman, Attorney Raul Lambino, President Jeffrey Nang, and all the members of the BOT that attended today, especially Vice President Felix Guanzon, Director Mafi, and the others. Let me invite you also, as mentioned by Director Mafi, of our next forum on November 17, 2022 at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. As mentioned, our two APCO 2022 awardees or laureates, Rod Kaponan and Professor Kainglet, will talk about the South China Sea behind the scene. Again, the topic alone would surely inform us of what is really happening in South China Sea. Again, thank you very much to all of you for your invaluable participation in today's forum. Good afternoon, and may God bless us all.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Dean, for that closing remarks. So in behalf of the Board of Trustees, so again, sincere thanks to the participants who cooperate and attended for today, and also to our outstanding distinguished speaker for today. Thank you, Ben, for sharing your valuable thoughts and of course your expertise. We're very grateful to have you. And again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you again and see you on next forum. Thank you and mabuhay. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.